The Forbidden City. To the emperors of China, this was the center of the world. It remains the largest palace on Earth and one of the greatest architectural wonders in history. Nearly 600 years ago, this golden palace was unveiled by its all-powerful creator, the great Ming Emperor Yongle. The Forbidden City hailed the emperor, the supreme ruler of all China. A man who could marshal 1 million workers to fell giant timbers from distant forests, haul huge 5-ton slabs of marble across ice, and expand the nation's great waterways to carry armies of men and materials thousands of miles across China, just to create his incredible dream, a palace like no other on Earth. But the Forbidden City was built on blood and betrayal. Nobody stood in this warrior's way. Were all eliminated as he clawed his way to the top to create the architectural marvel that still dazzles us today. But now, it is time for this Crimson Palace, this golden city, to reveal her secrets at last. In the far north of China lies the great capital city of Beijing. And at its heart is the ancient imperial palace. It is known as the Forbidden City.
This building still stands today as the symbol of the Chinese people and their great and glorious history.
Encircled by a thick wall nearly 30 feet high and over a mile long, the palace contains close to 9,000 rooms. Rooms that housed everything from the empire's treasury to the emperor's harem.
It's very hard to walk through the main gate without being in utter awe of that man.
Today, in Beijing's Olympic year, nearly $2 billion have been spent restoring it to its full glory. As many as 100,000 tourists a day come here to explore what was both a palace of pleasure and also the supreme headquarters of Imperial China for nearly half a millennium. But they should beware of where they tread. Every marble stair, every gleaming stone, every ornate beam holds a grisly secret, the brutal origins of the Forbidden City. For 6 centuries, this bloody tale has been buried away in the ancient texts of the Ming Dynasty. But now, finally, it can be told. It is September 1424, and the Forbidden City is shrouded in darkness. The entire court is in mourning. The Emperor Yongle is dead. The Emperor's most trusted servant, the eunuch Hai Shu, has come to dress his master for the afterlife. Tomorrow at first light, the body will be buried in the great Ming tombs outside the city. Tucked away in the opulent quarters of the imperial harem is one of the exquisite women who warmed the emperor's bed, the concubine, Lady Cui. She is making herself beautiful for her husband one last time for his funeral. And in a dark prison just outside the palace walls, China's Minister of Revenue, Xie Yuanji, incarcerated for offending the emperor, is still reeling from the news of Yongle's death. Each knew the emperor intimately. Each took the chilling story of Beijing's bloody beginnings to their grave. But there is a way to give them back their voice. Chinese specialists in Cambridge University have combed the long-neglected chronicles of the Ming Dynasty to dig out their tale. Hardly any of these ancient texts have ever been translated into modern Mandarin, let alone English. Now, at last, they have. And it is their words that will, after 6 centuries, breathe life back into these 3 very real members of Yongle's court.
I'm looking at one of the closing chapters in a text called The Ming Veritable Records. It's one of the closing chapters for the reign of Yongle, and it incorporates an account, an abbreviated account, of the circumstances of his death and the mourning that followed his death. And it includes a very moving, evocative eulogy. 大略修理精密之人，善人时
On the outside,
雄强。
you were severe, strict even. But on the inside, you were benevolent and kind. Brave, certainly. Courageous, of course. A talent for the most cunning of strategies. You undoubtedly knew how to get the most out of people.
It was this combination of severity and benevolence, this balance, that made him an effective military and civil leader.
But what I remember most about you, my emperor, my lord, is that you went far, far beyond the ordinary. You could not abide mediocrity. Nothing in your life could hold you back.
The eunuch Hai Shu was right. Yongle had let nothing stand in his way. The man who built the Forbidden City was never even supposed to be emperor. His palace is steeped in the blood of the thousands he killed to steal the throne. When he started out, the capital of China wasn't even in Beijing, but 550 miles to the south in the city of Nanjing. Years earlier, in 1393, Yongle was just a prince in the imperial family. The fledgling Ming dynasty faced a crisis. His eldest brother, the heir to the throne, had unexpectedly died. Their father, the emperor, had summoned his remaining sons to the imperial palace in Nanjing. Yongle, then known as the Prince of Yen, was now the emperor's eldest surviving son. A war hero, for years he had successfully defended the northern reaches of China from the Mongols, the empire's greatest enemy. This warrior prince felt certain that his father, the emperor, would now reward his military prowess and proclaim him his successor. But there was another claimant to the throne, the emperor's eldest grandson, the 15-year-old Jian Wen. Jian Wen was not like his uncle, the prince. He had never seen battle. He was far happier with his nose buried in a book. But the rules of succession had been laid down. The throne must pass from firstborn son to firstborn son. The emperor made his decision. He chose his grandson over the warrior prince.
He had no right to the throne. He knew that he had no right. And when his father went on to pass the empire down from his eldest son to his eldest son, his grandson, who was just a young man, completely untrained and inexperienced, I think he sensed a tremendous sense of loss.
And this deep feeling of loss would push Yongle down a new road that would lead all the way to the Forbidden City. Overlooked by his father to be the next emperor of China, Yongle retreated to the far northern town of Beiping to lick his wounds. He'd run his own fiefdom from here since he was 10 years old. This was his power base. Yongle was furious. According to the Ming Chronicles, he believed his father had not just chosen a weak successor, he had broken a promise.
These are words that the Prince of Yan's father allegedly said about the prince. Of all the princes, there's none who equals the Prince of Yan, for he is the most benevolent and filial. It is my preference that he be chosen.
Juzi?
My father promised me the throne. My son is worthy, enlightened, benevolent, generous. He's also brave and martial-like. That's what he said.
All the angry prince needed now was the spark to convince him to seize the throne for himself. He didn't have long to wait. One account tells that a soothsayer had been summoned to the tavern. He foretold that one day soon, the prince would be emperor. It was a prophecy remembered long after by Yongle's most loyal servant, the eunuch Hai Shu.
Everyone at court knew the legend. How the soothsayer bowed down before you and said, "Your Majesty, why do you lower yourself by coming to a lowly tavern like this? You have the bearing of a dragon and the ways of a phoenix. Your face is like a bright sun shining from the center of the sky. You have the gait of a tiger, and your voice peals like the bell. There is no question whatsoever that you are the true Son of Heaven."
The impact on Yongle of the soothsayer's prophecy that he was the Son of Heaven can still be seen in the very design of the Forbidden City. The emperors of China believed they were chosen by heaven to rule on Earth. To Professor Jeffrey Regal, it explains why Yongle aligned his palace from south to north, directly in line with the pole star, the celestial home of the supreme deity.
The whole palace complex is built along a central axis, the axis of the world. And it's imagined that this central axis going to the north connects up with the pole star, with the North Star. The pole star is seen as important because it's the fixed star in the heavens, and all of the other celestial bodies, all of the other stars revolve around the pole star while it stays fixed in its central, powerful position. And so if one has the palace complex along this axis that is lined up with the pole star, it's the same idea. Everything in the four directions suspend from this central point represented by these palaces.
In 1398, in the capital city of Nanjing, Yongle's father, the emperor, died. News soon reached the prince that his bookish nephew, Jianwen, only 20 years old, but now with a young family, had been proclaimed the new emperor of China. In Nanjing, Jianwen cultivated a style of government that was far removed from the warring ways of his uncle. For the new emperor, the capital Nanjing would be civil, intellectual, scholarly.
It was the largest metropolis in the wealthiest region of China. Perhaps there were about 250,000 to 350,000 people living here. Nanjing had a huge population, far larger than any city in Europe at the time. I mean, Paris and London were tiny in comparison. All the poets, all the painters, all the intellectuals, everyone you could possibly imagine would come here.
But in Yongle's mind, a dynasty run by poets and painters would never last. Not when there were warring enemies like the Mongols, who eyed China hungrily. On the 13th of July, 1402, he decided to take action.
The Prince of Yen arrived here with his forces in front of these massive defenses. The genuine emperor inside thought that he was safe. The only way that the Prince of Yen could get in was through treachery, and this is exactly what happened. One of the genuine emperor's leading generals opened the gates and allowed the Prince of Yen to enter the city.
No one could forget the night Yongle, the Prince of Yen, rode into Nanjing to seize the throne. Least of all, the jailed courtier Xia Yuanji. He was there that night, a junior minister in the imperial court. The tale he would tell over 20 years later almost defies belief. But this is how it was recorded in the ancient Chinese chronicles.
The Prince of Yen was closing in. Jianwen was pacing back and forth. We knew he was contemplating suicide. But then, the eunuch knelt down before him and told him a secret. Before, when your grandfather, the Emperor Hongwu, was about to die, he wrote you a letter and asked that it be opened only in the case of an emergency. Servants scurried to fetch the letter, which was locked inside a vermilion box. It was a plan of escape. Also inside the box were a sword, 10 ingots of gold, and a razor to shave his head.
It was an ingenious plan. The young emperor, Jianwen, was to flee from the palace disguised as a Buddhist monk. No one knows for sure whether he escaped or not, but in the official account of the attack in the Ming Chronicles, Yongle claimed the Emperor Jianwen made a gruesome decision. Rather than surrender to his uncle, he torched his own palace, condemning his family to burn. Yongle, the creator of the Forbidden City, was never born to be emperor. In 1402, while still a prince, he attempted to overthrow his young nephew, the Emperor Jianwen. Seizing the capital of Nanjing, Yongle discovered that Jianwen had torched his own palace and was now nowhere to be seen. Rumors soon began to circulate that a monk, flanked by guards, had been sighted fleeing the city. It was the last thing the prince wanted to hear. But then 3 blackened bodies were brought before him. the emperor's 6-year-old son, the empress, and the body of a young man so charred it could not be positively identified.
I think the discovery of the charred bodies was an opportunity for the Prince of Yen, because he could legitimately say that there was no emperor and he could take over. He was the head of the family. But at the same time, it also laid out the possibility, because they could not be identified, that the genuine emperor had fled, and fled in disguise, and could come back to claim the throne. Therefore, he basically had to legitimate his takeover from power in many, many different ways, and he tried to force people to accept him as the emperor. And, of course, many did not, resulting in a bloodbath.
The first move Yongle made to legitimize his takeover was to demand the official support of China's political elite. But to him, none was more important than the empire's most respected scholar, Fang Xiaoru. Their conversation that day was recorded in the Ming Chronicles.
Do not cause yourself any more trouble, sir. I would like you to set a good example. The emperor, it would seem, has burnt himself to death. The country needs a ruler, a grown-up. Proclaim my succession to the empire. Only you can right it.
我是万万不会做的。
No. That is indeed regrettable.
And so it was told, and will be passed on to generations from now. Fang Xiaoru, etched on the palace floor in his own blood. Just one word. Usurper.
Usurper, one who steals the throne. This vile slur would dog the prince for the rest of his life. In retaliation, he purged the city of all political opponents, killing tens of thousands. Only then did he proclaim himself Yongle, the emperor of perpetual happiness. But whispers that the former emperor Jianwen had escaped and would one day return to reclaim the throne refused to die. Yongle understood now he must wage a new war, a war of persuasion to prove to his people that he was the one and only emperor of China. He needed a grand new beginning and a clean reputation. First, Yongle instructed the scholars of China's Literary Academy to sugarcoat the story of how he stole the throne and present himself as his father's first and only choice for emperor. In the stroke of a pen, he would quite literally erase the reign of his predecessor from the official history. Paranoid that he might be demonized for rewriting history, Yongle decided to cover his tracks. Once the chief historian had completed his task, he was rewarded for his efforts and left out in the snow to die. In Nanjing, Yongle had done all in his power to stifle the opposition. But this was always going to be Jianwen City. If Yongle was to assert himself as the new undisputed emperor of China, it made sense to build a new capital and a new palace in Beiping, where his support base was strongest.
It is time for a fresh start, don't you think? A new capital for a new emperor.
In Nanjing, those courtiers who had survived the purge gathered to hear the new emperor's shattering plan to shift the capital of China 550 miles north to his own power base, Beiping.
I wouldn't want it said that this little building project is my decision alone. The work will no doubt be a burden on the people. It would be better if we were all in this together.
Among the groveling courtiers eager to please the formidable new emperor that day was the minister who 20 years later would be locked up in the prison outside the Forbidden City, Xia Yuanji.
Your Majesty, we sincerely believe that Beiping is the best place for a new capital. The rivers and mountains provide good defense. The water is sweet, and the soil fertile. The province of Beiping is truly the place from which Your Majesty arose. Your father was a conqueror, and he elevated the status of his hometown. Perhaps you could follow the precedent of your father and make Beiping your capital. This grand enterprise will benefit 1,000,000 generations.
And so it shall be. Beiping shall be no more. A new city, a new capital, the northern capital, Beijing.
Emperor Yongle decided to shift his Chinese capital north. The result is the huge metropolis of 15 million people we know today, Beijing. Though this was his hometown, Yongle had another more significant reason for moving the capital here. It was close to the border with their Mongol enemies. Yongle wanted to build a much bigger, grander city with more people and more soldiers. But he would have to build it virtually from scratch.
It was basically built in a barren plain which had very, very few people. It had been depopulated as a result of famines, natural disasters, wars, civil wars for decades before that. And in order to build it, they had to bring together the labor and the material from all over China, from thousands of miles away.
But how was Yongle able to orchestrate what was back then the biggest building project of its time? You only need to look a mile from the Forbidden City at the speed and scale of construction that has taken over the central business district of today's Beijing.
This is the China World Trade Center, Tower 3. It's going to be the tallest building in Beijing when it's finished, at 74 stories. It's near the top now. It's at about 60 floors, and it'll be finished at the top within 6 weeks from now. It's quite a remarkable building, 3 million square feet, and it's here in the center of Beijing.
Half of the world's steel and a third of its concrete is currently being used in the biggest metropolitan makeover on the planet. Soon, 300 more skyscrapers will create an entirely new skyline for the Chinese capital. In the time of the Emperor Yongle, millions of people and the resources of the nation were mobilized on the word of one man. Things haven't really changed.
The immediate impression is just the speed at which things are done here. We're in a centralized economy. We have a one-party state, and decisions are made quickly, and the planning process is fast. While there may not be the same level of accountability there is in the West, there certainly isn't the same amount of confusion nor delay. And China's determined that processes are not slowed down in its bid to become world economic power.
In 1406, the Emperor Yongle drew up the blueprint for his new capital. At its heart would be the vast palace complex, the Forbidden City. On 5 times as much land as today's Buckingham Palace, and with 65 times as many rooms as the White House, it would soon take its place in history as the largest palace in the world. To oversee the finances of this immense project was the minister Xia Yuanji.
I was made a minister of revenue, placed in charge of running the finances of the empire. The emperor ordered me to channel vast funds into the creation of the great gates and palaces of his new northern capital, Beijing. I responded to his call. I was unfailing in my desire to help the nation.
Helping the nation meant mobilizing over 1 million people to gather resources from every corner of the empire. Unpaid and hounded by Yongle's soldiers, workers were ordered deep into the uncharted forests of the southwest to fell giant hardwoods. At the mercy of disease, wild animals, and sheer exhaustion, it was said only half made it out alive. Up in the icy plains of the north, thousands more were dispatched to quarry stone. If materials were found to be substandard in any way, then the laborers were punished. To supply this army of workers, and to ferry the materials from one end of the country to the other, Yongle ordered the development of a massive system of waterways.
In order to construct his palace, he had to build the infrastructure first. Without the infrastructure, he couldn't feed all the workers, he couldn't feed all the laborers, he couldn't feed the artisans, and he couldn't feed his army. There was no way to do it by land. It would have been far too costly, and there wasn't the road system. There was nothing there.
The solution was to command 300,000 men to re-dredge and extend the Grand Canal. This vast 2,500-year-old system of waterways had in the last 100 years silted up and become unnavigable.
The Yongle Emperor encouraged the opening of the Grand Canal all the way up to Beijing. It was really because of the Grand Canal and all the feeder canals that allowed China to continue and develop to be the wealthiest empire in the world.
The main rivers of China fed into the Grand Canal, which, once it was reopened, flowed for an incredible 1,100 miles. Yongle would create the longest man-made waterway in the world, all the way to Beijing.
The emperor ordered me out on an imperial inspection to punish any idle workers I could find with the full weight of the law. For this task, he provided me with a full contingent of the Imperial Guard. Conditions were harsh, and I feared the people could never withstand them and would be falsely accused of laziness.
To supervise the construction, Yongle would need a whole new tier of managers. In Nanjing, a team of eunuchs was recording the exact dimensions of every brick, every pillar, and every stair of the old palace, so that the new palace could be built even larger and more magnificent. For Yongle, the eunuchs were the perfect servants. It was said they would slavishly do the bidding of any emperor.
A eunuch is a man who has been emasculated, has lost or had his balls, his genitalia cut off. And the whole point of that is that The eunuch cannot have his own children. Therefore, his loyalty will be to the person who employs him. In other words, the Yongle emperor.
No one knows when or where Yongle's most trusted eunuch, Hai Shu, was castrated. Only that in all likelihood, he was a teenaged boy. The young men who underwent the operation were most often escorted by a guarantor who would witness the operation and pay the castrator. It was a dangerous procedure. In addition to the excruciating pain, once both the penis and the scrotum had been sliced off, there was an extremely high chance of excessive bleeding and urinary infection. If the eunuch survived, healing could take months. The so-called treasure parts were kept in a jar and prized as proof of their unflinching loyalty. Though no longer a man, the eunuch could enjoy a life of untold privilege and wealth. As the Ming chronicles reveal, for those such as Yongle's adoring servant Hai Shu, it was worth the sacrifice.
Any slight mistake we might ever make as a eunuch was watched carefully, and you made certain that we receive the appropriate punishment. Mindful of the mistakes of previous generations, you always protected those who were loyal to you and treated us honestly. But if we slipped up, you never failed to point it out until we rectify it. If we didn't do so immediately, we might lose everything: our house, our benefits, even if we had accumulated merit in the past. But if we served you well, the rewards.
It appears to us that that Yongle placed more trust in his eunuchs than he did in virtually any other members of the imperial court, and to be favored that way by the emperor was of enormous benefit, not only to Hai Shu, but to his entire family.
The Emperor Yongle had recruited an army of more than 3,000 eunuchs to run his forbidden city. They were entrusted not just to supervise the construction of the palace, but to fill it with sumptuous fittings and furnishings. Over 1/4 of the palace would be given over to housing the most exquisite treasure of all, women. In 1408, the eunuch Hai Shu was sent on an imperial mission to Korea to demand for the emperor's new palace silks, cloth, furs, and virgins.
Korea, you sent us there to tell the king to offer up his most beautiful girls. He kowtowed before us and said, "I don't dare refuse to do my utmost to fulfill His Majesty's wishes." He sent his officials across the land to select virgins, impoverished ones, those from good families, no matter. Any pretty ones had to be reported. None were to be allowed to get away. Anyone who hid their daughters or cut their hair off to make them look ugly was arrested and deprived of their possessions. Then, the girls were brought before us at the palace.
One of the young virgins brought before Hai Shu was the teenage daughter of a Korean government official. Years later in the Forbidden City, she'd remember that day as if it was yesterday. Her name was Lady Chui.
were all beautiful virgins, and all between the ages of 13 and 25. I was so nervous that day. We stood there neatly, in lines of 100, all arranged by height, so that the emperor's eunuchs could inspect us.
Show me your hand. Turn over. Your teeth. Hand.
It must be a terrifying process to go through. I don't think the woman had much say in those days. If their father decided that they wanted their daughter to be the concubine, they had no say.
Open.
They have to be beautiful, have to be young. They also have auspicious looks. For example, a woman have, if a woman got very short upper lips or very thin earlobe, that's not an auspicious sign. That's not good. Chinese women don't have a strong odor as Westerners, but they think it's very bad if they have bad odor from under their arms. That those one certainly not good enough. Those who at night snore, would fart, would talk, dribble, so that's no good.
Whittled down to the final 10, the remaining girls were taken off for a thorough internal examination by senior palace women. As the ancient texts make clear, only the purest young ladies would be shipped away to a new life of unimaginable luxury.
On the third day, the eunuchs went round, measuring our hands and our feet. Then we were made to walk round and round so they could observe our style. Of the 300 girls that were brought in, just 5 of us were selected.
With the other 4 girls, Lady Cui was transported 600 miles to China to enter the emperor's new harem. She would never see her home again. Until the Forbidden City was completed, Lady Cui would be kept in the old imperial palace in Nanjing. The novice concubine had much to learn.
May I leave the palace ever? See what is outside.
There is no need. Any request you should have for clothes, food, gold will be met. Though, you should firstly be reported to the eunuch in charge of the imperial life here in the palace. The appropriate official will...
Officials?
Also eunuchs. They will be dispatched to verify your requests. Once your request is verified, you may collect your things from the imperial treasuries. And don't trifle with procedures. If a eunuch fails to verify and double-check one of your requests, he will be sentenced to death.
The eunuch Hai Shu was not joking. Precise rules governing every aspect of life in the palace are recorded in detail in the Ming Chronicles, known as the Ancestral Instructions.
What if I should fall ill? May I summon a doctor into the palace?
Palace people cannot summon for a doctor. It is up to the official of the Imperial Medicine Bureau. They will assess the symptoms and summon the appropriate doctor. Then they, together with 3 eunuchs, 2 old maids, they will accompany the doctor into the palace to view the patient. If the eunuchs and officials do not accompany him in, and only the old maids lead him in, then the supervising official, guarding officer, bureau official are all to be beheaded.
If Lady Cui was to survive in this dangerous world, she could not afford to make one false move. But if she could catch the eye of the emperor, she could become a woman of great wealth and great power.
Throughout history, there were some concubines who become very powerful, successful. One lives in hope in those days too, and you would hope you will be favored by the emperor, and you will produce an heir. Once you get to that stage, you will be given huge amount of money, and you have enormous power. All your families will given titles and the glory for the whole family.